Chapter 1. Introduction. India, Land of Diversity. India, this name alone evokes images. Colorful markets full of spices, the golden domes of magnificent temples, the majestic Himalayan peaks, the calm watercourses of the Ganges, the music of flutes and drums, the voices of millions of people who speak to each other in dozens of languages. India is a country of contrasts, diversity, and history. Whoever tells the story of India does not tell the story of a single country, but that of an entire world in miniature. A country like a subcontinent. Geographically, India is much more than just a state. It is a subcontinent. Enclosed by the Himalayas in the north, washed by the oceans in the south, it forms a world of its own. Independent cultures developed here early on, which were in constant exchange with Persia, Central Asia, China, and the Middle East. This geographical diversity characterizes the country to this day. To the north, the snow-capped peaks of the Himalayas. In the middle, fertile plains crossed by rivers such as the Ganges and Yamuna. In the south, tropical coastal regions with rich vegetation. This nature has made India a land of diversity and home to one of the oldest civilizations in human history. Population richness and diversity. India is now the most populous country in the world, but diversity has always been his trademark. Languages. Over 1,600 languages and dialects are spoken. Hindi and English are official languages, but there are also powerful regional languages such as Bengali, Tamil, or Marathi. Religions. India is the cradle of Hinduism, Buddhism, Jainism, and Sikhism, religions that have influenced millions of people worldwide. Islam and Christianity also have deep roots in India. Cultures. From the dances and musical traditions of the South to the festivals and rituals of the North, India is a mosaic of cultures. This diversity has often been a source of conflict, but also of strength and creativity. India, a country of stories. India is also a country of stories. Mythological epics such as the Mahabharata and the Ramayana are not only literature, but part of living culture. They shape moral concepts, religious rituals, and even politics. Philosophy and wisdom. Indian thinkers such as the authors of the Upanishads or Buddha himself asked universal questions about suffering, meaning, and truth, and found answers that still inspire worldwide today. Markets and streets. Whether it's the Silk Road or the spice trade, India has always been a center of exchange of goods and ideas. Why India's history is special. The history of India differs in many ways from that of Europe or China. Continuity. While many empires came and went, India's religious and cultural traditions remained surprisingly stable. Diversity instead of unity. India has rarely been a unified state. Many kingdoms and cultures often existed side by side, but they were in exchange and influenced each other. Influence worldwide. Indian ideas, religions, and products spread to Southeast Asia, China, Persia, and the Middle East. The influence on world history, art, and philosophy can hardly be overestimated. From antiquity to modernity. India's history spans thousands of years, ranging from the early cities of the Indus culture to the high-tech nation of the 21st century. Indus culture, one of the first advanced civilizations in the world, with impressive urban planning. Maurya and Gupta empires, classical epics of philosophy, art, and science. Middle Ages, kingdoms, sultanates, and the Mughal Empire formed a rich cultural mosaic. Colonial period. The British shaped India, exploited it, and at the same time aroused resistance. Independence and modernity. Mahatma Gandhi led the country to freedom. Today, India is the largest democracy in the world. The importance of India for world history. India is not only important for itself, but for all of humanity. Religious. Without India, there would be no Buddhism, Hinduism, Jainism, or Sikhism. Scientific, mathematics, astronomy, medicine, many foundations of modern science were laid in India. Economic, for thousands of years, India was one of the richest countries in the world and a center of global trade. Philosophical, Indian thinkers have provided answers to universal questions that are still relevant today. Conclusion, the beginning of a long journey. India's history is like a river, sometimes calm, sometimes stormy, sometimes divided, but always in flux. If you want to understand this history, you have to be prepared to accept diversity, complexity, and depth. In this video, we will go on a journey together, from the earliest cities on the Indus River through the empires of antiquity and the Golden Age to the colonial era and modern India. It is the story of one of the oldest civilizations in the world, and a nation that is still full of life, energy, and questions today.
Chapter 2. The Indus Culture, Cradle of Indian Civilization. If you want to tell the story of India, you don't start with the Vedas or the Mughals, you start with the Indus. Here, in the northwest of the subcontinent, one of the earliest advanced civilizations of mankind emerged, the Indus culture, also known as the Harappa culture. It existed from about 2600 to 1900 BC and was one of the three great cradles of civilization, along with Mesopotamia and Egypt. Discovering a forgotten culture. The Indus culture fell into oblivion for thousands of years. It was not until the 19th and early 20th centuries that archaeologists discovered the remains of cities such as Harappa and Mohenjo-daro during excavations. The finds showed streets in a strict checkerboard pattern. There were multi-story houses made of fired bricks. Sewerage systems showed amazingly advanced urban planning. These discoveries were a sensation. We were dealing with a culture that was at least as developed as Egypt or Mesopotamia, and yet completely independent. Urban planning and everyday life. The Indus culture was primarily an urban culture. Streets ran in right-angled patterns, like in modern cities. There were central warehouses, marketplaces, and public buildings. The water supply and sewerage system were highly developed. Every house had connections for sewage. This planning points to a central administration, even if we still do not know of a clear ruler or king. People's everyday life. The people lived from agriculture, crafts, and trade. They grew wheat, barley, and cotton. Craftsmen made jewelry, ceramics, and tools. They traded with Mesopotamia. Seals with Indian writing were found there. Society seems to have been relatively egalitarian. There is little evidence of monumental palaces or huge royal tombs. Scripture and religion. One of the greatest mysteries of the Indus culture is its writing. Hundreds of short inscriptions on seals and clay tablets have been found. But to this day, the writing has not been deciphered. Therefore, we know little about their religion or politics. Some symbols point to early forms of Hinduism, images reminiscent of Shiva or sacred animals, such as the bull. But this remains speculation. Trade and economy. The Indus culture was heavily involved in international trade. Finds show connections as far as Mesopotamia. Copper, tin, precious stones, and cotton were exported. Shells and ivory indicate coastal trade. The economy was based not only on agriculture, but also on flourishing craftsmanship. Social structure. The society of the Indus culture seems unusual to us. There are no distinct palaces or temples. Power structures seem to have been less hierarchical than in Egypt or Mesopotamia. Some historians suspect an urban democracy or a form of collective rule. This could be one of the reasons why the Indus culture remained stable for so long. The decline. Around 1900 BC, the Indus culture began to disintegrate. The reasons have not yet been clearly clarified. Climate change. Changes in the monsoon led to droughts and shifted river courses. Overexploitation. Deforestation and overexploitation of soils may have weakened agriculture. Invasions. Some theories speak of immigration by Indo-European peoples, but the archaeological evidence is disputed. In the end, the big cities dissolved and people returned to smaller settlements. Significance for India. The Indus culture did not disappear without a trace. Some religious symbols lived on in Hinduism. The tradition of urban planning influenced later cultures. It forms the root of Indian civilization, even if the connection to later epochs is not always direct. An unsolved mystery. To this day, the Indus culture is shrouded in mystery. Who were their rulers? What did the people believe? Why did the culture disappear? As long as the writing is not deciphered, many questions remain unanswered. But it is precisely this mystery that makes the Indus culture so fascinating. Conclusion: the first great river in India. The Indus culture was India's first great civilization, highly developed, urban, interconnected, and yet mystical. It shows that India was already a center of human culture 4,000 years ago. With its end, a new epoch began, the Vedic period, in which religion, philosophy, and social structures emerged that still shape India today.
Chapter 3: Vedas and Early India, the Beginnings of Hinduism. After the decline of the Indus culture, a new epoch began in India, the Vedic period. It lasted from about 1500 to 500 BC and marks the arrival of the Indo-European peoples on the subcontinent. During this time, the Vedas, the oldest sacred texts in India, were created, and with them the foundations of Hinduism and the early caste system. The arrival of the Aryans. Around 1500 BC, groups of Indo-European tribes, often referred to as Aryans, immigrated to northern India. They brought their language with them, which later developed into Sanskrit. They initially lived as semi-nomadic cattle breeders and farmers. Their religion was a polytheistic natural religion, with gods such as Indra, god of war, or Agni, god of fire. This immigration mixed with the remnants of the Indus culture and created a new cultural foundation. The Vedas, sacred texts. The word Veda means knowledge. The Vedas consist of 4 main collections: Rig Veda, Samaveda, Yajurveda, and Atharvaveda. They contain hymns, rituals, sacrificial formulas, and philosophical reflections. Originally, they were handed down orally, but only later fixed in writing. The Rig Veda is the oldest of these works and is considered one of the oldest religious texts of mankind, c. 1200 BC. Religion and worldview. The Vedic religion was characterized by sacrificial cults. Fire offerings, yagna, were central to appease the gods. Priests, Brahmins, who led the rituals and thus gained great influence. A cosmology that saw order, Rita, as a universal principle, a forerunner of the later Dharma. Over time, religion evolved. Rituals became deeper philosophical questions about the meaning of life, suffering, and rebirth. The origin of the caste system. In the Vedic period, the caste system, Varna, developed, which still shapes Indian society today. Brahmins, priests and scholars. Kshatriyas, warriors and rulers. Vaishyas, merchants and farmers. Shudras, servants and workers. This order was religiously legitimized and formed the basis of a hierarchical society. Later, it became even stricter, but in the early days it was more flexible. Society and everyday life. Vedic society was strongly rural. Agriculture became increasingly important, especially rice cultivation in the Ganges Valley. Livestock breeding, especially cattle, played a central role. Cows became sacred. In the early Vedic period, women had comparatively many rights, such as participation in rituals. Later, however, her position decreased. Transition to philosophy. From about 800 BC, the Upanishads emerged, a collection of philosophical texts that deepened the ritual religion of the Vedas. Key concepts: Atman, the individual soul; Brahman, the universal world principle; Samsara, the cycle of rebirth; Moksha, liberation from this cycle through knowledge. These ideas became the basis of Hinduism and later influenced Buddhism and Jainism as well. The early states. In the late Vedic period, the first states and kingdoms were formed.
Small principalities arose in the Ganges Valley, which often fought each other. New cities developed, trade and crafts increased. The first political theories emerged, for example, about the role of the king in the protection of dharma. This prepared the ground for the later great empires, such as the Maurya Empire. Significance of the Vedic period. The Vedic period is fundamental in several ways. It gave birth to the Vedas, the holiest scriptures of Hinduism to this day. She developed the concepts of dharma, karma, and rebirth. It formed the caste system and a hierarchical society. It laid the foundation for India's religious and philosophical diversity. Conclusion: the beginning of Indian thought. The Vedic period was more than just a transition from the Indus culture to later empires. It was the birth of Indian thought. Religion, philosophy, society, and language, which still shape India today, have their roots here. Rituals turned into questions about the meaning of life. Hymns of the gods became philosophy. Tribal associations became states. India began to shape its own identity, an identity that would last for thousands of years.
Chapter 4: Maurya Empire and Ashoka, the First Empire. After the early kingdoms of the Ganges Valley, India entered a new epoch, the time of the great empires. The first and most powerful of these empires was the Maurya Empire, which existed from about 321 to 185 BC. It was the first empire to politically unite most of the Indian subcontinent. Its most important ruler was Ashoka the Great, who went down in history not only through conquests, but also through his conversion to Buddhism. The emergence of the Maurya Empire. The founder of the empire was Chandragupta Maurya. Around 321 BC, he overthrew the Nanda Empire and established a new system of rule. Chandragupta seized the opportunity when Alexander the Great and his successors left power in northwestern India, but were unable to establish a lasting rule. With the help of his advisor Chanakya, or Kautila, the author of Arthashastra, he developed an efficient administration and a streamlined military organization. The capital was Pataliputra, now Patna, a center of politics and culture. Administration and organization. The Maurya Empire was known for its highly developed administration. The Arthashastra describes an empire held together by bureaucracy, espionage, and strict legislation. Provinces were governed by governors who were directly subordinate to the king. A standing army with infantry, cavalry, elephants, and chariots secured power. These structures made it possible to hold together an empire of unprecedented size in India. Ashoka the Great. The most important ruler of the Maurya Empire was Chandragupta's grandson, Ashoka, who reigned from about 268 to 232 BC. At first, he pursued an aggressive expansionist policy. After the bloody conquest of Kalinga, now Odisha, in which thousands died, he experienced a deep moral crisis. He turned to Buddhism and made its principles the basis of his rule. Ashoka's reign. Ashoka is considered one of the most extraordinary rulers in world history. He erected pillars and rock edicts, in which he proclaimed his policies and moral principles. These edicts, spread throughout India, are the oldest written testimonies of Indian history. He preached ahimsa, nonviolence, tolerance towards other religions, and respect for all living beings. Ashoka had monasteries built, promoted the mission of Buddhism to Sri Lanka and Central Asia, and made India a center of religious culture. Economy and society. Under the Mauryas, the economy flourished. India was involved in trade with Central Asia, Persia, and the Mediterranean. Cotton, spices, precious stones, and metal goods were sought-after export goods. Farmers, craftsmen, and merchants formed the basis of prosperity. Society was still dominated by the caste system, but the size of the empire also gave rise to a cosmopolitan culture. The decline of the empire. After Ashoka's death,
the empire began to fall apart. Weaker successors were unable to maintain control. Provinces became independent, internal conflicts increased. Around 185 BC, the Maurya Empire was finally overthrown. But its legacy lived on. The idea of united India, the spread of Buddhism, and Ashoka's reputation as a righteous ruler. Significance of the Maurya Empire. The Maurya Empire was formative in several respects. It was the first empire to politically unite almost all of India. With Ashoka, the idea of a morally led state was born. It produced the oldest written testimonies of Indian history. It anchored India in the great trade and cultural exchange of the world at that time. Conclusion. A realm between power and morality. The Maurya Empire was India's first great empire, a combination of military strength, bureaucratic order, and cultural flourishing. Ashoka, the conqueror who became the ruler of peace, is still a symbol of India's history today, a balance between power and morality, war and wisdom, diversity and unity. His legacy lives on to this day, in the Indian national coat of arms, which shows Ashoka's lions, and in the idea of a united, diverse India.
Chapter 5. The Golden Age, Gupta Empire and Cultural Blossom. After the fall of the Maurya Empire, India experienced many centuries of fragmentation. Small kingdoms, invasions, and changing dynasties determined the landscape. But in the 4th century AD, an empire arose that brought India a new heyday, the Gupta Empire, circa 320 to 550 AD. This period is often referred to as the Golden Age of India because art, science, literature, and philosophy flourished in unprecedented ways. The emergence of the Gupta Empire. The Gupta Empire was founded by Chandragupta I, founded. With clever marriage alliances and military strength, he built a kingdom in the Ganges Valley. His son, Samudragupta, r. circa 335 to 375, led numerous campaigns that expanded the empire. Under Chandragupta II, r. circa 375 to 415, the empire reached its greatest expansion and cultural flowering. The capital, Pataliputra, as it was under the Mauryas, was once again a center of power and culture. Administration and society. The Gupta rulers ruled less centrally than the Mauryas. Local princes and vassals retained certain freedoms. Taxes were collected regularly, but there was less harsh control. The king was considered the protector of Dharma, the religious and moral order. The society was strongly influenced by Hinduism, which found its classical form during this time. Religion in the Gupta Empire. The Gupta period is considered the epic of the Hindu Renaissance. The great epics Mahabharata and Ramayana were written down in their present form during this time. Temple architecture experienced an upswing. Many early Hindu temples date back to this era. The cult of Vishnu, Shiva, and Devi flourished. At the same time, Buddhism and Jainism continued to exist, especially in certain regions. Science and mathematics. The Gupta Empire was a pinnacle of Indian science. Mathematics. The great scholar Audiobook, ca. 500 AD, systematically introduced the zero as a number symbol and developed approaches to trigonometry. Astronomy. Aryabhata calculated the Earth's rotation and the orbital periods of the planets with astonishing accuracy. Medicine. Works such as the Sushruta Samhita described surgical methods and remedies. Many of these findings later spread to Europe via the Arab world. Literature and art. The Gupta period was also a heyday of literature. The poet Kalidasa wrote masterpieces such as the drama Shakuntala, which is still performed today. Sanskrit became the language of literature, science, and administration. Stories such as the Panchatantra fables were created and influenced fairy tales all over the world. In art, Indian sculpture reached a new level. Statues of gods and Buddhas were created in an elegant, harmonious form. Architecture. The architecture of the Gupta period shaped the classical form of the Indian temple.
Stone and cave temples such as those in Ajanta and Ellora testify to high craftsmanship. Frescoes in the caves of Ajanta depict scenes from the life of the Buddha. This temple architecture became a model for the whole of South and Southeast Asia. Economy and trade. The Gupta period was also an era of prosperity economically. India was involved in international trade. Silk, spices, and precious stones were important export goods. Coins made of gold and silver testify to economic strength. Farmers, craftsmen, and merchants formed the basis of wealth. Trade contacts reached as far as the Roman Empire and Southeast Asia. The decline of the Gupta Empire. In the 5th century, the empire began to weaken. Invasions of the Huns shook northern India. Provinces became independent, vassals became independent. Around 550 AD, the empire finally collapsed. But its cultural heritage remained. The Gupta Empire shaped India for centuries. Significance of the Gupta Empire. The Gupta Empire is considered the golden age of India because it set standards in many areas. The classical form of Hinduism emerged. Literature, art, and architecture reached new heights. Scientific achievements influenced world history. The idea of a culturally united India was consolidated. Conclusion: a golden age. The Gupta Empire was not only a political but above all a cultural empire. Its literature, art, science, and philosophy made India a center of world culture. To this day, this era is regarded as India's golden age, a high point that many later generations used as a guide.
Chapter 6: Medieval India, Kingdoms and Diversity. After the collapse of the Gupta Empire, India entered an era of regional empires. From the 6th to the 12th century, the subcontinent experienced a period of great diversity. Numerous kingdoms existed side by side, often in competition, but also in the exchange of culture and trade. This period was characterized by impressive architecture, deep religious developments, and the rise of new powers. Political fragmentation. After the end of the Guptas, India disintegrated into many smaller empires. In the north, dynasties such as the Harshavardhana, 7th century, ruled, which briefly created a certain unity. In the west, the empire of the Rajputs flourished, becoming famous for their courage and offensiveness. In the south, powerful dynasties such as the Cholas, Pallavas, and Pandyas ruled, who built up large maritime trading empires. Despite the lack of political unity, India continued to develop culturally and economically. Religious diversity. The medieval period brought important developments in religion and philosophy. Hinduism continued to gain prominence, especially through the Bhakti movement, which emphasized personal devotion to God. Buddhism continued to exist, especially in monasteries such as Nalanda, but gradually lost influence in India itself. Jainism remained strong in certain regions, especially in Gujarat and Karnataka. Religious tolerance and mixing characterized this epoch. Many cults and traditions developed in parallel. Culture and education. India was a center of science and education during this time. Monasteries such as Nalanda and Vikramashala were international universities that attracted students from all over Asia. Sanskrit literature continued to flourish, but regional languages such as Tamil, Kannada, and Telugu also developed a rich literature. Architecture and sculpture reached new heights. Architecture and art. Medieval India was a time of great buildings. Temple architecture reached an unprecedented level of complexity. In the south, the Dravidian temples with high gopurams, for example in Madurai. In the north, the Nagara temples with filigree towers, e.g. in Khajuraho. Khajuraho sculptures are famous for their artistic depiction of religious and erotic scenes. Rajput palaces and forts, often made of stone and built on hills, show military strength and artistic finesse. Trade and economy. India was an important hub of international trade in the Middle Ages. Spices, cotton, silk, and precious stones were exported to Arabia, China, and Southeast Asia via the Indian Ocean.
Indian traders and seafarers founded colonies in Southeast Asia. Indian influence on culture and religion in Cambodia, Thailand, and Indonesia is still visible today. Domestic trade flourished in cities and markets. The economy was based on agriculture, but also on highly developed crafts. The Rajputs. Especially in the north of India, the Rajputs played an important role. They were warrior lords who ruled small, often rival kingdoms. They were famous for their chivalry, bravery, and loyalty. Their forts, such as Chittorgarh or Mehrangarh, are among the largest structures in India. The Rajputs were defenders of Hindu traditions and later played a key role in the conflicts with Muslim invaders. The South, the Empire of the Cholas. In the south, the Cholas rose to become one of the most powerful dynasties, 9th to 13th centuries. They ruled large parts of South India and Sri Lanka. Their fleet controlled trade in the Indian Ocean. The Brihadeshwara Temple in Thanjavur is a masterpiece of Chola architecture. The Cholas combined power politics with religious promotion and profoundly shaped the culture of South India. Decline and transition. Towards the end of the Middle Ages, internal rivalries and external invasions weakened the regional empires. Invaders from Central Asia repeatedly invaded northern India. Around 1206, the Delhi Sultanate was established, a turning point that ushered in Islamic rule in India. This marked the end of the era of classical medieval kingdoms and the beginning of the time of the Sultanates and later the Mughal Empire. Significance of the medieval era. Despite political fragmentation, India's medieval period was an epoch of great cultural power. Religion and philosophy continued to develop. Temples, sculptures, and literature set standards. India was a center of international trade. This time prepared the ground for the next great epoch, the meeting of Hinduism and Islam, which was to have a lasting impact on India. Conclusion: diversity as a strength. Medieval India was a land of diversity. Countless kingdoms, languages, religions, and cultures coexisted. This diversity was not only a source of conflict, but also a source of creativity and strength. It gave rise to a cultural heritage that is still visible today in temples, literature, fortresses, and traditions. Chapter 7: Arrival of Islam, Sultanates and Mughal Empire. The arrival of Islam in India was one of the most profound turning points in Indian history. From the 8th century onwards, Muslim traders and conquerors came to India, and from the 13th century onwards, permanent Islamic empires were established. At first, it was the Delhi Sultanate that dominated the north, later the glamorous Mughal Empire that shaped India for centuries. This era brought new religions, architecture, administrative structures, and also conflicts that still have an impact today. First contacts with Islam. Islam came to India in two ways. Traders. As early as the 7th and 8th centuries, Arab merchants traded on India's west coast, especially in Kerala. They founded Muslim communities that lived peacefully with the locals. Conqueror. From 711 onwards, Muslim troops under Muhammad ibn Qasim invaded the Indus Valley. There, the first Muslim rule in Sindh emerged. But it was not until the 12th and 13th centuries that larger Islamic empires emerged in the north. The Delhi Sultanate, 1206 to 1526. The Delhi Sultanate was the first major Muslim empire in India. It was founded in 1206 by Kutbuddin Aybak, a Turkish general. The capital was Delhi, which developed into a political and cultural center. Several dynasties ruled one after the other: Mamluks, Khiljis, Tughlaqs, Saids, and Lodis. Administration and society. The Sultanate brought a tightly organized administrative system. Persian became the official language. Islamic culture, art, and architecture merged with Indian traditions. Culture. Monuments such as the Qutub Minar in Delhi bear witness to this time. Islamic scholars, poets, and Sufis enriched the culture. At the same time, tensions arose with Hindu majorities, especially over temple demolitions or conversion movements. The transition to the Mughal Empire. In 1517, the rise of the Mughal dynasty began in Central Asia. She was of Turco-Mongolian origin and related to Timur and Genghis Khan. In 1526, Babur, the founder of the Mughal Empire, defeated the last Sultan of Delhi at the Battle of Panipat. This marked the beginning of a new era, the Mughal Empire, 1526 to 1857. The Mughal Empire, splendor and power. The Mughal Empire is considered one of the most glamorous eras in Indian history. Babur and Humayun. Babur, 1526 to 1530, laid the foundation stone of the empire but was unable to consolidate it. His son Humayun temporarily lost the empire to Afghan rulers, but later regained it. Akbar the Great. Akbar was the most important Mughal emperor. He expanded the empire over almost all of northern India. Administration, introduction of an efficient tax system, zamindari system. Religion, Akbar was known for his tolerance. He abolished special taxes for non-Muslims and promoted dialogues between religions. Culture, under Akbar, art flourished, miniature painting, literature, and architecture. Jahangir and Shah Jahan. Akbar's son Jahangir continued his politics, but was more art-loving than warlike. Shah Jahan, 1628 to 1658, is famous for building the Taj Mahal, one of the most beautiful structures in the world, as a tomb for his wife Mumtaz Mahal. Under him, the Mughal Empire achieved cultural splendor. Aurangzeb, 1658 to 1707, Aurangzeb expanded the empire to its greatest territorial extent. But his strictly orthodox Islamic policy led to tensions with Hindus and other groups. After his death, the slow decline of the empire began. Society and culture in the Mughal Empire. The Mughal Empire produced a unique cultural synthesis. Architecture, palaces, mosques, and gardens, such as the Red Fort in Delhi, the Jama Masjid, and the Taj Mahal. Painting, Mughal miniatures combined Persian, Indian, and European styles. Language, Persian remained the official language, but the mixing with local dialects led to the emergence of Urdu. Society, Hindus and Muslims lived side by side. There were exchanges, but also conflicts. Trade and economy, the Mughal Empire was economically strong. India was a center of world trade in cotton, silk, spices, and precious stones. European traders, Portuguese, Dutch, French, and British, came to India. India's wealth made it a sought-after target for colonial powers. The decline of the Mughal Empire. After Aurangzeb, the Mughal Empire gradually disintegrated. Regional rulers, Marathas, Sikhs, and Rajputs gained power. Invasions, for example by Persia's Nadir Shah, weakened the empire. European colonial powers, especially the British, took advantage of the weakness. In 1857, the Mughal Empire finally ended when the last emperor, Bahadur Shah II, was deposed after the Indian uprising. Significance of the Islamic era. The Islamic period had a lasting impact on India. It brought new architecture, art, and literature. Administration and tax systems influenced later structures. Hinduism and Islam merged in parts to form new forms, for example in Sufism or the Bhakti movement. At the same time, religious tensions arose that continue to have an impact on modern times. Conclusion: a legacy of glamour and contradictions. The era of the Sultanates and the Mughal Empire made India a cultural and economic center of the world. It produced some of the greatest buildings of mankind and fostered an exchange of ideas, languages, and traditions. But it also left wounds, conflicts between religions and power struggles that weakened the country. India was now a country characterized by diversity and mixing, and a scene that would soon become the focus of the emerging European colonial powers.
Chapter 8. European Traders and Colonialism. The British are coming. With the gradual decline of the Mughal Empire in the 17th and 18th centuries, a new chapter in India's history opened: the arrival of the Europeans. Traders from Portugal, the Netherlands, France, and finally Great Britain came to the coasts of India, initially in search of spices, cotton, and precious stones. But trading posts became colonies, merchants became rulers. The British, in particular, knew how to exploit India's political fragmentation and laid the foundation for the British Empire in India. First Europeans in India: Portugal.
In 1498, Vasco da Gama reached India and landed in Calicut, now Kozhikode, Kerala. The Portuguese established bases in Goa, Diu, and Daman and controlled the spice trade for some time. Dutch. The Dutch East India Company, VOC, established branches but soon concentrated more on Indonesia. French. The French East India Company established important trading centers, including Pondicherry. But none of these powers was to shape India as much as the British. The British East India Company. In 1600, English merchants founded the British East India Company, a private trading company with royal privilege. First, they received trade rights from the Mughal Empire. Branches were established in Surat, later in Madras, Bombay, and Calcutta. The company traded in cotton, silk, indigo, tea, and spices. However, with the weakness of the Mughal Empire, the company began to get involved in politics. The rise of the British. A decisive moment was the Battle of Plassey, 1757. The British officer, Robert Clive, defeated the Nawab of Bengal. The East India Company thus controlled the richest region of India, Bengal. This marked the beginning of British domination. In the decades that followed, the British used diplomacy, wars, and alliances to expand their influence. Management by the company. Between 1765 and 1858, the East India Company ruled large parts of India directly. It raised taxes, built up its own army, and ruled like a state. Indian soldiers, so-called sepoys, served in large numbers in the company army. Corruption and exploitation led to famines, especially in Bengal. The company was no longer a neutral trading company. It had become a political power. Economic exploitation. Under British rule, India was increasingly degraded to a colony. Traditional crafts such as the Indian textile industry were destroyed. British factories produced cheap cotton fabrics which displaced Indian products. India became a supplier of raw materials. Cotton, indigo, tea, and opium were exported. Famines were exacerbated by the focus on exports. India, which had once been one of the richest countries in the world, was impoverished under British colonialism. Cultural encounters. The arrival of the Europeans also brought cultural exchange. European sciences, printing houses, and schools came to India. Missionaries spread Christianity, built churches and schools. At the same time, an Indian self-confidence grew, inspired by Western ideas of freedom and equality. Many Indian elites saw the opportunities offered by the new education and began to organize themselves against British rule. Resistance against the British. Resistance to the East India Company began early. Peasant uprisings, religious movements, and local wars posed challenges for the British. But the decisive uprising was the Sepoy Uprising of 1857. The Sepoy Uprising, 1857. The trigger was the introduction of new cartridges that were allegedly smeared with beef and pork fat, an insult to Hindus and Muslims. Indian soldiers, sepoys, mutinied in Meerut and moved to Delhi. The uprising spread across northern India and united different groups. But the British brutally crushed the uprising. The uprising showed that Indians were willing to rise up against the colonial power, but it failed. Consequences of the uprising. The uprising of 1857 had profound consequences. The East India Company was dissolved. From 1858 onwards, the British Crown took direct control. The British Raj began. The British relied on a mixture of repression and reforms to stabilize their rule. This marked the beginning of a new era of colonial rule, one that was to last until the 20th century. Conclusion: retailers become rulers. Chapter 8 shows how merchants became rulers. What began with Vasco da Gama and Portuguese trading bases ended with almost complete control of India by the British. The East India Company took advantage of the weakness of the Mughal Empire, regional rivalries, and economic power to subjugate an entire country. But in the resistance, especially in the uprising of 1857, the Indians' will for freedom was already evident. This will was to lead to independence in the 20th century.
Chapter 9. The British Raj under the Crown. With the failure of the Sepoy Rebellion in 1857 and the dissolution of the British East India Company, a new era in Indian history began, the British Raj. From 1858 to 1947, India was directly under the rule of the British Crown. These almost 90 years were marked by modernization, infrastructure, and administration, but also by exploitation, famine, and growing resistance. The takeover by the Crown. In 1858, Queen Victoria declared India a direct Crown colony. A British Governor-General, later Viceroy, was appointed. Local princely kingdoms were formally preserved, but had to recognize British sovereignty. India thus became part of the British Empire, the jewel in the crown. Management and control. The British built up a highly developed administration. Civil servants, mostly British, controlled provinces and districts. Indian elites were involved in the service, often as lawyers, teachers, or administrative officials. The English legal system was introduced. This administration was efficient, but also alienated. It served primarily British interests. Infrastructure and modernization. The Raj also brought modernization, but in the interest of the colonial power. Railways. A huge rail network was created, bringing raw materials from the interior of the country to the ports. Telegraph and post. Communication systems connected the country. Canals and dams. New irrigation systems have improved agriculture in some regions. But this infrastructure was primarily there to facilitate trade and control. Economic exploitation. The economic policy of the Raj had devastating consequences. India became a supplier of raw materials for Great Britain: cotton, jute, tea, indigo. India's textile industry was systematically destroyed to favor British factories. Millions of farmers suffered from high taxes and forced cultivation. Famines, such as the Great Famine of 1876 to 1878, claimed millions of lives, often exacerbated by British export policy. Society and culture. British rule profoundly changed Indian society. The English language became the language of administration, education, and elites. New universities in Calcutta, Bombay, and Madras formed an Indian intelligentsia. Missionaries brought Christianity, but also founded schools and hospitals. A new generation of educated Indians emerged, familiar with both Indian traditions and Western ideas of freedom and democracy. Political developments. In the late 19th century, organized Indian politics began. In 1885, the Indian National Congress was founded, initially a gathering of elites who demanded reforms. Muslims founded the All India Muslim League in 1906, which represented their own interests. The first demands for self-administration were raised. The British responded with limited reforms, but held firm control. Social tensions. Colonial rule exacerbated existing tensions. The caste system remained, often even reinforced by the British. Religious differences between Hindus and Muslims were politically instrumentalized. The partition of Bengal by the British in 1905 led to large protests and the rise of nationalist movements. The First World War and its consequences. India played a central role in the First World War. Over 1 million Indian soldiers fought for the empire. Many Indians hoped to receive political concessions in return. But the disappointment was great. The British gave only minimal reforms, while repression increased. The famous Amritsar massacre of 1919, in which British soldiers shot hundreds of unarmed civilians, shocked the country and strengthened the independence movement. Gandhi and the nonviolent movement. In the 1920s, Mahatma Gandhi became the center of Indian politics. He preached ahimsa, nonviolence, and satyagraha, seeking truth through civil disobedience. Actions such as the Salt March, 1930, became symbols of resistance. Millions of Indians took part in boycotts, strikes, and peaceful protests. Gandhi gave the independence movement a moral and spiritual foundation that was admired worldwide.
The Second World War and the crisis of the empire. In the Second World War, the British again mobilized millions of Indian soldiers, often without the consent of Indian politicians. The Quit India movement in 1942 demanded immediate independence. Economic strains led to the Bengal famine in 1943, in which millions died. After 1945, it was clear that the British could no longer maintain their rule in India. Conclusion: under the Crown, but not broken. The British Raj brought modernization and a unified administration, but also exploitation, poverty, and oppression. India became a central part of the British Empire, but at the same time a new national consciousness grew. English education, Indian tradition, and resistance to injustice gave rise to a movement that eventually brought the empire to its knees. The Raj was the last chapter of colonial rule and the prelude to independence.
Chapter 10: Gandhi and the Freedom Struggle. The history of India in the 20th century is inextricably linked with the name Mahatma Gandhi. He was neither a king nor a general, but a simple man with a revolutionary idea that you can defeat an empire through nonviolent resistance. Gandhi's life and work made him one of the greatest symbolic figures of the 20th century and led India to independence in 1947. Gandhi's early life. Born in 1869 in Porbandar, Gujarat, into a wealthy religious family. Studied law in London. Later worked as a lawyer in South Africa, where he fought against racial discrimination for the first time. In South Africa, he developed the concepts of satyagraha, perseverance in truth, and ahimsa, nonviolence, which shaped his political action. Return to India. In 1915, Gandhi returned to India. At first, he worked in smaller movements, for example to improve the living conditions of farmers. Soon, however, it became the symbol of a new politics, not elitist and parliamentary, but a mass movement. He combined spiritual conviction with practical action, and thus won millions of followers. The rise to leadership. After the First World War, Indian resistance against the British intensified. The Amritsar Massacre, 1919, in which British soldiers shot hundreds of demonstrators, was a turning point. Gandhi called for civil disobedience, boycotts of British goods, refusal of taxes, strikes. In 1920, he took over the leadership of the Indian National Congress. His strategy was to mobilize the masses: Hindus, Muslims, peasants, workers, women. Principles of nonviolent resistance. Gandhi developed a unique political philosophy. Ahimsa, nonviolence. Violence only breeds new violence, so resistance can be peaceful. Satyagraha, adherence to the truth. Moral strength and suffering can be more powerful than weapons. Self-sufficiency. Gandhi preached the Swadeshi idea: Indians should boycott British goods and weave their own fabrics. Spinning on the wheel became a symbol of resistance. The Salt March, 1930. A particularly famous example of Gandhi's policy was the Salt March. The British had a monopoly on salt and taxed it highly. In 1930, Gandhi marched 380 kilometers to the sea with thousands of followers to extract salt himself. Millions of Indians followed his example. The images went around the world and made it clear that the colonial power had lost its moral authority. Setbacks and repression. The British reacted harshly. Gandhi was imprisoned several times. Demonstrations were violently suppressed. Many Indians despaired of the slowness of progress. But Gandhi's idea gained worldwide recognition. Other movements, such as Martin Luther King's civil rights movement in the USA, later invoked him. World War II and Quit India. During the Second World War, India was again massively claimed by the British. Millions of Indians fought in the British Army. At the same time, poverty worsened, and in 1943 there was the Bengal famine, in which millions died. Gandhi and Congress launched the Quit India movement in 1942, the demand for the immediate withdrawal of the British. The movement was brutally suppressed, but the end of the war changed the situation. Britain was exhausted and could no longer hold India. The partition of India. While independence became inevitable, tensions between Hindus and Muslims came to a head. The Muslim League under Muhammad Ali Jinnah demanded its own state, Pakistan. Gandhi fought against partition until the end. He wanted a united India in which Hindus and Muslims lived together. But in 1947, India and Pakistan were divided. The division led to huge streams of refugees, pogroms, and millions of deaths, a tragedy that contradicted Gandhi's vision. Independence and Gandhi's death. On August 15, 1947, India became independent. Jawaharlal Nehru became the first prime minister. Gandhi himself was hardly involved in the celebrations. He was busy trying to bring peace between Hindus and Muslims. On January 30, 1948, Gandhi was assassinated by a Hindu extremist who reproached him for his attitude towards Muslims. Gandhi's legacy. Gandhi left behind a legacy that went far beyond India. His nonviolent resistance inspired worldwide movements for civil rights and freedom. In India, he is still considered the father of the nation. His picture adorns banknotes. His birthday is a national holiday. But his legacy is also ambivalent. The partition of India and the violence showed the limits of his ideal. Conclusion: the power of nonviolence. Gandhi proved that even an empire can be defeated by moral force and peaceful resistance. His life shows that politics can be changed not only by weapons, but also by values. India's struggle for freedom was not a military victory, but a moral triumph, and Gandhi became its embodiment.
Chapter 11: Division and Modern Republic. India's independence in 1947 was one of the greatest moments in modern history, but it was also overshadowed by a tragedy: the partition of British India into the states of India and Pakistan. This process led to the largest migration movements and outbreaks of violence of the 20th century. After that, India began its journey as the world's largest democracy, full of hopes but also with immense challenges. The road to division. Tensions between Hindus and Muslims had already built up in the late 19th century. The Indian National Congress Party, founded in 1885, was initially a rallying point for all Indians, but increasingly demanded a dominant role for Hindus. The All India Muslim League, 1906, represented the interests of Muslims who feared becoming a minority in an independent India. Muhammad Ali Jinnah, leader of the Muslim League, called for the creation of a separate state from the 1940s onwards, Pakistan, land of the pure. The British, weakened by the Second World War, no longer saw themselves in a position to hold India and decided to divide the country. The division of 1947. On August 15, 1947, India became independent and, at the same time, divided into two states. India with Hindu majority, Pakistan, originally West and East Pakistan, today's Pakistan and Bangladesh, with a Muslim majority. This division was hastily implemented. Borders were hastily drawn. Millions of people did not know which side they would live on. Refugee flows and violence. The consequences were catastrophic. Around 14 million people fled across the new borders, Hindus and Sikhs to India, Muslims to Pakistan. Pogroms, massacres, and retaliatory actions took place on the streets. Estimates range from 500,000 to 1 million dead. The partition left deep wounds in the collective memory of India and Pakistan. Gandhi and the partition. Gandhi fought against partition to the end. He wanted a united India in which Hindus and Muslims could live together peacefully. But he could not change the political realities. After independence, he devoted himself to reconciliation until his assassination in January 1948. His death symbolized the tragedy of this era. Nehru and the New Republic. India's first prime minister was Jawaharlal Nehru, a close confidant of Gandhi and a leading figure in the Congress. Nehru relied on democracy, secularism, and socialist economic planning. In 1950, India adopted a new constitution that made the country a republic. The caste system was officially abolished, and women were given equal rights. India became the largest democracy in the world with free elections and a federal structure. Economic and social challenges. The new India was faced with immense tasks. Millions of refugees had to be integrated. Poverty and illiteracy were widespread. The economy was weakened by centuries of colonial rule. Nehru relied on a mixed economy, state-controlled industrialization, but also agricultural reforms. Foreign policy and non-alignment. India sought an independent role in world politics. Nehru was a co-founder of the non-alignment movement, which belonged neither to the USA nor to the Soviet Union during the Cold War. India played an important role in peace initiatives and international conferences. At the same time, there have been repeated conflicts with Pakistan, especially over the region of Kashmir, which is still disputed today. Social change. The young republic implemented reforms. Abolition of untouchability in the caste system. Promotion of education and infrastructure. Introduction of quotas for disadvantaged groups, Dalits, tribal peoples. But the reality was more difficult. Discrimination, poverty, and inequality remained. Conclusion. A new beginning, but full of scars. India's independence was a historic triumph, but the partition was a deep wound. Millions of deaths, refugees, and ongoing conflicts overshadowed the new beginning. Nevertheless, India managed to build a stable democracy, unique in a world in which many post-colonial states slipped into dictatorships. The modern Republic of India began with hopes, pains, and the vision of a pluralistic, democratic nation.
Chapter 12. India in the 20th and 21st centuries. Independence in 1947 was only the beginning. In the decades that followed, India evolved from a poor, colonialized nation to one of the world's largest economies and the most populous democracy. But this path was accompanied by ups and downs, economic successes, political crises, wars with neighbors, and far-reaching social changes. The Nehru era, 1947 to 1964. Jawaharlal Nehru, India's first prime minister, laid the foundations of the modern republic. Economy. Nehru relied on a planned economy based on the socialist model. 5-year plans were intended to promote industrialization and infrastructure. Foreign policy. India became a co-founder of the non-aligned movement. Nehru wanted to position India independently of the superpowers. Society. Education and science were promoted. In 1951, India founded the first IIT, Indian Institute of Technology. His policies brought progress, but poverty and population growth remained major problems. Wars and conflicts. India soon had to defend its borders. 1947–48, First War with Pakistan over Kashmir, a conflict that still smolders today. 1962, War with China, which India lost, a shock to the self-confidence of the young state. 1965 and 1971, further wars with Pakistan, the latter leading to independence from Bangladesh. These conflicts shaped India's military policy and strengthened national consciousness. Indira Gandhi and the challenges of democracy. After Nehru's death, his daughter Indira Gandhi, no relation to Mahatma Gandhi, took over. She continued her father's course, but was more authoritarian. In 1975, it declared a state of emergency. Freedom of the press was restricted, opposition members arrested. Her policies brought India criticism, but also stability in difficult times. Indira Gandhi was assassinated by Sikh extremists in 1984, after she ordered the military storming of the Golden Temple in Amritsar. Rajiv Gandhi and economic reforms. India's son Rajiv Gandhi took over the office and was technology and future-oriented. He slowly opened up the economy to modern technologies. However, his attempt to modernize the country was overshadowed by corruption scandals. In 1991, Rajiv Gandhi was murdered by Tamil extremists. The liberalization of the 1990s. 1991 marked a turning point. India was on the verge of insolvency.
Prime Minister P.V. Narasimha Rao and Finance Minister Manmohan Singh introduced radical economic liberalization. Import restrictions have been lifted, foreign investment has been permitted. The Indian economy opened up and experienced strong growth in the decades that followed. These reforms made India an emerging economic power. Social change. Parallel to the economic opening, society changed. IT boom. Cities like Bangalore became global technology hubs. Middle class. A growing urban middle class shaped consumption and culture. Bollywood. India's film industry has become a global brand. Tensions. The caste system, religious conflicts, and social inequality remain major challenges. Political diversity and tensions. India developed a complex political system. For a long time, the Indian National Congress dominated, but from the 1990s onwards, the Bharatiya Janata Party (BJP) rose to power. Religious nationalism, especially Hindu nationalism, gained in importance. At the same time, federal structures and regional parties remain an important counterweight. India in the 21st century. Today, India is a country of extremes. Economy. India is one of the largest economies in the world, driving IT, space, and the pharmaceutical industry. Politics. Under Prime Minister Narendra Modi since 2014, India is embracing Hindu nationalism, economic reforms, and a stronger role on the world stage. Society. India is young. More than half of the population is under 30 years old. At the same time, poverty remains widespread. International role. India is a nuclear power, a member of the G20, and a major player in global politics and business. Challenges and opportunities. India is facing major challenges. Poverty and equality. Despite growth, millions live in extreme poverty. Environmental problems. Air pollution, water shortages, and climate change threaten millions. Religious tensions. Conflicts between Hindus, Muslims, and other groups endanger social peace. Globalization. India must find its role between the US, China, and other powers. But at the same time, the young population, the spirit of innovation, and democracy offer enormous opportunities. Conclusion. A country between tradition and modernity. India in the 20th and 21st centuries is a country full of contrasts. Deeply religious and ultramodern, democratic and conflict-ridden, poor and rich at the same time. The journey from a colonially oppressed country to the largest democracy in the world is unique. India has fought for its place on the world stage, and its future will be decisive for the world in the 21st century.
Chapter 13. India's Legacy, Culture, Religion, and Future. India is more than a country. It is a continent in miniature, with a history that spans thousands of years, with religions and cultures that have shaped the world, and with a future full of opportunities and challenges. India's legacy is evident in philosophy, religion, science, art, and politics. But at the same time, the question remains, what role will India play in the 21st century and beyond? Religious heritage. India is the cradle of some of the world's largest religions. Hinduism, with its gods, rituals, and philosophies, it shapes the lives of hundreds of millions of people. Buddhism. From India, Buddhism spread to Asia and influenced cultures from China to Japan. Jainism and Sikhism, smaller but deep-rooted religions with strong ethical influence. Islam and Christianity have also taken deep roots in India. India's ability to sustain this diversity, despite tensions, is part of its legacy. Philosophical heritage. India's philosophy has had a universal influence. Concepts such as karma, dharma, and moksha pose fundamental questions about justice, meaning, and salvation. The Upanishads, the Mahabharata, and the Ramayana are among the deepest literary and philosophical texts of mankind. Gandhi brought this tradition into the 20th century and inspired worldwide movements for freedom and human rights. Scientific heritage. India was not only a country of religion but also of science.
Mathematics, the invention of zero, the decimal system, and early algebra. Astronomy, insights into planetary motions and the Earth's rotation. Medicine, Ayurveda and surgical texts such as the Sushruta Samhita. This legacy lives on today. India is a leading nation in IT, space, and science. Cultural heritage. India has also shaped the world culturally. Cuisine, from curry to chai, Indian spices shape world cuisine. Music and dance. Classical traditions such as Raga and Bharatanatyam, as well as Bollywood, shape a global picture. Film. Bollywood is the largest film industry in the world, whose influence extends far beyond India. Political heritage. India is the largest democracy in the world, an experiment of global importance. Despite poverty, diversity, and conflict, elections are held regularly. Federal structures give regions autonomy. India shows that democracy can work even in a huge, poor, and diverse country. This is a legacy that inspires other nations. Challenges of the future. But India's heritage is also a task. Poverty and inequality. Millions of people have no access to education, health, or clean water. Environmental problems. Climate change, air pollution, and water scarcity threaten the country. Religious tensions. The balance between Hindu nationalism and pluralistic democracy is fragile. International role. India must find its place among the superpowers as an independent but influential power. Opportunities of the future. India has enormous opportunities. A young population that is innovative and dynamic. A growing economy that will soon be one of the largest in the world. A cultural strength that is recognized worldwide. A strategic role in a multipolar world. India can become one of the leading nations on Earth in the 21st century. Conclusion: an eternal legacy. India is a country of contrasts, rich and poor, modern and traditional, united and fragmented. But it is precisely these contrasts that are his strength. India's history shows that diversity is not only chaos, but also creativity, resilience, and renewal. India's legacy lies in its ability to reconcile differences, to combine spirituality and science, and to reinvent again and again. India is a civilization with no beginning and no end, a story that has been told for thousands of years and is far from over.